And,
Hey, hi everyone.
thank you so much for joining us tonight, guys.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here. Thank you.
Yes,
of course.
you're gonna bless us with such amazing information. I cannot wait. This is a really important topic, and it's timely. The holidays are right around the corner. And ladies, you know what happens around the holidays. You get weird. We get weird. Everything gets weird, okay? You're either like Mrs. Claus and you just love the holidays, and there's you're like really weird to me, sorry. Or I'm just kidding. Or you're like me, us poor schmucks. I don't know. I'm not going to talk for you, Jenny and Gillian, but maybe you're like me and completely get weird in the opposite direction with the holidays, where relationships get tough and depression gets worse and anxiety rises. And you're like, is it January 1st yet? Like, let's just skip over all this crap, right? And this is something that I've struggled with for over a decade of my life. So what I've started to learn was that I'm not alone. This is actually something a lot of us go through. And Gillian here, she is a relationship expert. She really focuses on mindset, the mindset that you have as it pertains to healing your relationship. So she's here to talk to us about strategy. First of all, make us understand why this happens to us during the holidays. And then she's going to help us with some strategy to help start the healing process. So, Gillian, what's up?
Yes. Yeah. So as you were talking about, the holidays are like an interesting situation where, it's joyful and we all love doing this, but yet at the same time, we feel this immense amount of stress during this time. So first I want to talk about what stress even is, right? So if, for example, for you guys, what do you feel when you feel stressed? Like, how does it feel to you? How do you feel in your body? How do you feel emotionally? Throw some words out there.
How are you feeling lately, Jenny?
Oh gosh, that was a really good question, Gillian, for me, because I feel anxiety physically all the time. I'll get headaches, I'll get muscle tension, I get like stomach upset, like it just affects my body in all different kinds of crazy ways. I'll get very tired, which is unlike me because ordinarily I'm an insomniac. I just knows I don't sleep like ever. So when I'm like very, very stressed, I'm just tired because my body can't keep up with it anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So stress is interesting because it kind of works two ways. It's an emotional and a physical response to something has triggered fear or a negative or a disempowering belief that we hold ourselves. So stress is just another word for a fear of something. And it could be not having enough time. It could be not doing a good enough job. It could be just like having too much on our plate, planning, all these obligations that we feel like we need to do, right? And this creates stress. So physically, like you say, it's common to get, like a tight chest, an upset stomach. You could feel just like tired physically, and you're kind of tense as well. Like sweating, you're breathing heavily as well. Emotional things could be anxiety or worrying, sadness as well. Even just a sense of like dread. Sometimes you just have a sense of dread as well. So all of these come into play, and it totally affects our behavior and how we feel. So which is counterproductive in the holidays because we want to be happy and we want to feel our best, right? And it's difficult to do that. So that's basically what stress is. And I feel like people try to look at just the external factors of stress, but it's really important to recognize that those external factors are just triggering what's already going inside in your mindset, right? So the idea here is to really get to that root, address what that is so that you prevent it from happening over and over, or at least you don't stay in a stress response state for as long as you used to, right? Because we can't always change the external factors. So this is really about mastering your mindset and your responses to these situations and being able to actually enjoy your time a little bit better.
Yeah. We want our ladies to have a better holiday experience. And I'm laughing as you're talking because I'm looking at you and I see Jenny in my peripheral, and you've just made like bobbleheads of us. We're like, yes, that's right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's so true. Like ordinarily holidays can kind of heighten or like shine spotlights on things that we're already anxious about,
Mhm.
like particular relationships that we have with family members or romantic
Mhm.
relationships, what have you. We have all of these like expectations that the holidays are going to be lovely, but then we're also compounded by the climate that we're in right now, as far as COVID is concerned,
Yeah.
and our political climate, and the things that would like ordinarily make us anxious about like getting together with family we haven't seen in a little while, whose views may be different than ours, or maybe not being able to see family in the way that we're used to this year because of COVID. What are some ways that we can, in this amplified climate right now, kind of
Mhm.
close the stress cycle? Like, what are some practical
Yeah,
tips?
so I'm going to kind of go through that in a minute, but you
Yeah.
just picked up some really good points. So the most common sources of stress when it comes to these situations are judgments. So judgments we put on ourselves or ones that we expect from other people. Okay, so you gave really good examples of that. And I talked a little bit about that earlier in terms of what, are we judging ourselves based on our situation? Like, for example, single people, it's really hard for them during the holidays, or divorced people, because they feel like that already, maybe they feel like a failure in that area, because like the holiday time is like, oh, I should have a partner, I should all this, and everyone always asks them when they go into those situations, like, are you dating anyone, blah blah blah, and it creates the sense of stress, so you anticipate it before you even go into it. And then even if you're in a relationship, it could be about how you're handling your kids, or like COVID now, like some people may not understand if you want to homeschool your kids versus not, like you're going to be questioned about that when you go into those situations by people. So this kind of stress comes from judgments, either within ourselves or from other people, expectations. So like that comes a lot with like hosting, for example, where you feel like you have to do all this stuff, expectations for the amount of people you have to see, or maybe you can't see the people that you want to see. And that creates this kind of conflict in the expectations. And then lastly, as we already touched about, is about difficult people, right? So we're going these situations where it could be like in-laws that we don't get along with, or it could be like a sibling or a parent that, tends to trigger us and kind of like ask us questions that bother us, or just like maybe the way that they live their life, we don't agree with, right? So these are kind of the sources, the three sources. And knowing that is really good because it helps you build awareness of what you can do about it, right? So do you guys want to go into that part about what we can do?
Yeah, that would be really helpful to put some practical tools into our audience right now, because I know everybody's counting down, right? We're like second week of November. It's getting there.
Yeah,
So we
it
would love
is.
some practical ideas.
Right. So I have 3 steps basically that people can do. And it will be a little bit more work than just like going to relax or something and take time for yourself. That's really important. But in order for you to actually effectively deal with this and be able to do it next time and avoid this kind of happening, is that you have to do a little bit of mindset work. So you have to do a little bit of thinking, you have to do a little bit of consideration, ask yourself some questions, think about the people that are bothering you. And this is really about adjusting your perspective about judgments, expectations, and difficult people. That's what it is. So that you can go into it not feeling as bad as you normally do, and be able to feel like you have power over this, which you do. And it's really important that we recognize that and that we exercise that power. So firstly, you want it to yourself. Now, a lot of people stop here. They think, oh, I'm just going to take a bath or like read a book before bed and take some time to unwind. So that's really important, but you can't stop there, because if you don't do the mindset work in that state of calmness, it comes up again, right? So the first step, take some time. So whether that means you take a bath, whether that means you wake up in the morning before the rest of your family does, so you're alone and you have some quiet time. And this is where you're going to do some considerations, which is going to be the next 2 steps. So however way you want to relax, you do that. Take some time. Number two, you want to identify and understand why your stress is being triggered. So that's the first step. And understanding is honestly half the battle, because like if we understand the source of what we're fearing, then we can actually pinpoint and do something about it. So when I say identify the triggers, so it's kind of like when exactly does this happen? Do you do it when you start doing your shopping? Are you in a particular household where it happens? Are you doing a certain activity? Is it when you're cooking, for example, that you start doing this, or when you start seeing a specific person? So you want to ask, okay, when is this happening? Where am I being triggered? And who is triggering me, right? So is it my parent? Is it a sibling? Is it an uncle or aunt? Whatever it is. So who's doing that? And then you want to understand it. So this is where you kind of try to pick out what the root cause is. So with judgments and expectations, it's usually coming from a fear where we don't think we're going to be good enough in a particular situation, or we're judging ourselves as failing in a certain part of life, or not meeting, standards. And a lot of these standards, they first come into our mind because we take it in from our social circles, from media, and everything that people are expected to do. We take it from the past, what we've learned growing up from our parents or other people as well. So that's really good. And sometimes when we're in a situation, another thing that comes up in the holidays is something could be new. So you could be like meeting new people, like for example, your partner's family, if you have a new partner, or anything like that, where the outcome is a little uncertain, right? And you're worried about being liked or accepted. So that's kind of where you figure out the root. Are we dealing with because like I'm afraid of not being good enough, I'm afraid of being like a bad mom, or I'm afraid of like not giving enough, for example, when I'm in that situation? So when you understand what exactly it is, it gives you a little bit more light to be like, oh, okay, this is what I need to think about. Make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. And I
Cool.
love that you gave so many different examples, because it really is so different from one person to the next, right? Like we all know that the holiday time can produce stress in us, but the cause of it is going to be so unique to each of us. So being able to actually give yourself the time to really troubleshoot, maybe even like write some things down, right? Like write some ideas down.
Exactly.
Because sometimes it's not that easy to answer that question. Like, why do I, like, have you ever had anxiety and you're like, man, I have anxiety. And I'm like, I don't even feel like anything's wrong. But for some reason you have the anxiety and you just don't even know why. Right?
Yeah, so that's why it's important to take the time, because what happens when we're in a state of stress, when we're in the stress, it's really difficult to think like rationally.
Yeah.
We just go in this circle, and that is a result of the stress response, because stress hormones are being activated in our body, and then that shuts down rational thinking parts of our brain, and we're able to think like in realness instead of in our like cycle. So that's why it's difficult to do this when you're in a state of stress. That's why it's so important when you go and do this, that you take some time, you relax a bit, do some breathing, do something that makes you feel a bit chilled out. And then you want to do this, because then your brain will open up to its creative ability to be able to really think through this stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. That's a very good point.
I gotta be honest with you. Oh, sorry, but I gotta just tell you a really quick story. So mine was so long, right? I told you it was like over a decade, and it was so convoluted with so many different layers of why the holidays brought me stress. I actually had to take a year to like reset. Like I had to step away from the holidays to start thinking about myself and what I wanted the holidays to be like for me, and how I could bring joy to others without compromising my mental health. Like that's how it was. So I wanted to just like kind of give an example to anyone that's listening of like the extreme. Like if you need to do that, that helped me so much.
Yeah. And sometimes it is saying no, like sometimes it is saying no, as in like saying, like I even have to do that sometimes with my family. Like my parents aren't together, so I have two different things, and then like my husband's family, and it's like holidays, it's like you go to like 10,000 different things. And it got to a point where I actually said to my parents, like, each holiday I have to pick one and alternate. Like, I'm not doing all of this because it was way too much, right? So like, that's building boundaries as well. So you can think about that as well during this time, is like, what boundaries do you need to put on? And the second step is like, how do you not feel bad about that? Because sometimes that can come with guilt, right? And then you just doing the work in terms of, you know, like, I can actually be my better self in these situations if I put the boundaries in, right? So then you see it like a benefit to the outcome of whatever you're trying to do, rather than something that's taking away from the time that you're trying to spend with your family. So that's kind of a perspective shift as well that you can do. So that kind of leads me to the third point. So when you have this time, you've identified why you get triggered and you kind of have an idea of why. Then you want to apply some kind of simple spirit lifting, like I like to call them, mindset tools. So you kind of have to group them in two things. So first of all, if you've identified that you're really dealing with judgments and expectations, when it like you're either putting them on yourself or you feel like someone else is putting it on you, then you want to kind of think about, how can I give myself a break about this? You know, like, how am I still succeeding, or how am I still a good person, and all of these things when you're in these situations, even if, you know, you do get judged in this situation. If we're talking about personal judgments on ourselves, it's really important to recognize and acknowledge that that is just one perspective that you happen to have, and it's usually based on a past negative experience. It's not an ultimate truth that is defined, you know, defines you forever, and it's definitely not an indication of what else could be possible for you. So this is you kind of being like, you know, I'm not a failure if I'm single during the holidays, and I'm not a bad mom if I don't get my kids like their favorite toys for Christmas, and like that I don't host like 50 people at my house. You know, like how else am I a good mom? How am I thriving being single just because, you know, like, so it's really thinking that stuff is, how can I prove this one perspective wrong, and how could it potentially not be true, and then how can I give myself a break about it? So that's if you're dealing with yourself. The other part, which everyone deals with, is difficult people, right? So like, how do I change my perspective about someone just who annoys the hell out of me when I go to these places? Like, what do I do? You know, like, I can't control what they're going to do, but you can very much control your response to it, how you go into the situation. You can be a different person when you go into that situation. It's actually not too hard to do that. So first thing is, you want to try to focus on as little or as many positive qualities of that person before you go into the situation. Okay, so most of us go into a situation with a person that's difficult, and before we're even there, we're already thinking about all the things that we don't like about them, or things that we think that they're going to do, like critical to us and all this stuff. And because our brain is kind of a filter for whatever we're focusing on, what happens when you go into that situation is that those qualities, the negative ones, become more evident to you. Your brain starts finding proof about why those things should be true. So the idea is that you switch it. So when you go into it, you have to focus on anything you can find, like anything about that person. It could be a good memory. It could be just a quality that you like. Pay attention to them and try to assess their, you know, behaviors and their comments, and be like, oh, that was like a nice thing. Even if it's small, like it could be as small as possible. You want to try to minimize as much as possible the amount of negative kind of like focus that you're about that person that you're going in. So that's one thing to do. The second thing you want to do is try to develop a sense of compassion for that person, even if they're being difficult or critical. So people who are this way, I like to think of the phrase that like, hurt people, okay? So like, people who act like this are usually going through something really within themselves, whether it could be from the past or something they're currently going through, and they're just stuck in that. And a lot of people don't realize exactly how they're coming across to other people. So it's important to kind of have compassion. And if they're judging you for something, you have to remember that it's probably because at one time they judged themselves about that. So an example of that would be like, let's go back to the, you know, not having a good partner or something. In the holidays, if someone asks you about that and be like, oh, you know, like you really should be with someone, or you really should like fix your relationship with your wife or your husband or something, you have to understand that they're saying that because probably at one time they either probably felt really lonely being alone, or they were in turmoil with their relationship and they think that's a bad thing and it felt bad for them. They're just not asking you in, the most, the best way they could. But it's really important to try to have some kind of compassion for what someone might be going through, whether that be now or way back in the past, so that's good. And then the other thing that if you can do, which would be really great, is ask yourself, is there something that I can do to minimize that person being triggered? Okay, so sometimes we can look at our people close in our family and figure out, like, when do they kind of start being nastier? Like, when do they ask me, like, if I talk about this subject, do they go off on me, for example, right? So looking back and saying, like, okay, what is there something I can do to either not talk about that topic if it's coming up, or not to trigger them and ask a certain question. And then when you're in there, you want to try to engage with them and focus on their interests and their passions, because that is it just takes people off the defense as well. So those are basically, some easy things you can implement. I would definitely recommend you try it. It works really well. I've done it many times in my life and taught other people to do it too, and it works wonders. But just, it works. And I think, like, your motivation is really like, who wants to go through this stuff anymore? Like, we want to be able to enjoy the time with our family. We don't want to feel all this pressure during the holidays. It's not supposed to be like that. So it's important to kind of put this stuff in motion so that you can enjoy life with the people you love.
I think that's really good and practical advice. And as you were thinking, and as you were speaking, I think I've heard it described as like tripping someone's alarm system. Like when you enter into these scenarios, with family members or people that we don't always have the best of relationships with. Like we can definitely preemptively think through what their alarm system is triggered by, right? And we can make this cognitive decision that just because we're deciding we're not going to utilize these specific subjects or topics in order to trigger their alarm system doesn't mean that we don't believe any less in our own morals or standards or decisions. It doesn't change how we view the world. But it does kind of give permission, right, to like turn off the alarm systems for this particular circumstance and really focus on what's best for everybody. Which I just think is like a really beautiful focal point for the holidays. But whenever we get together with people who are like-minded and not so like-minded with us, I think that's great advice. Pervasively. So thank you.
Yeah, you can, it's not only about the holidays, like you can use this anytime with anybody, even with people at work as well, that we've all had that. So you could even do that as well.
This all makes sense. It really does. And I've been a student of mindset training for a while now. And I think that the things that you've given are practical advice and they're easy to understand, but I do think that sometimes it's easier said than done. It really is hard work mentally for some people, because the first thing is you have to be willing to take 100% responsibility in fixing it for yourself. And sometimes 100%. It's really hard when we blame other people, or we have, long lasting resentment towards, people that we have to be with during the holidays. And sometimes we get triggered and we don't even realize why, because it's visceral and it's just become a part of us. So this is, it can be, depending on, how far ingrained that visceral response is to the stuff you're going to be facing. It can be some hard work. So I love everything that you shared. Like it's the right answer, right? Like you get my vote. That's the right answer. But, the practice, oh my gosh, it took me years.
Yeah, you have to. Yes, you have to commit to it. And like, that's why it's good to start this, like sooner. But some of these things you can implement right away in terms of focusing on the positive aspects about somebody. Like that is super, like it's not difficult to do. You can do that right before you go into a situation. Like some of it, you're right, it might take you longer to understand. But you can definitely try this in baby steps for sure, and you'll see improvements.
What I found with that technique is when you do it, it does work. Like, oh my gosh, it works. Are you kidding me?
It works amazingly.
The difficult part is wanting to do it, right? Like, when they tell you, like, when you're in a really big fight with your husband and they say, pray for your husband. And you're like, you know what I mean? Like, but then like after you do, when you like start praying for your husband, you start thinking about all the wonderful things about him. And all of a sudden you start softening, but like getting to the point of actually wanting to think about good things about that person, just getting over that hump, I think, is the hardest part.
And that's okay to take time to live in your feelings for a bit. Like you're not going to switch off like a light switch. But in that moment, the most important thing you say to yourself is, I'm willing to try to see this in a different way. And I'm willing to bring my emotions up even just 1 or 2 steps. I don't have to go from the bottom to the top in 5 minutes. Okay, that's not possible. But you have to tell you, listen, I'm feeling this way. I feel bad. I'm angry. But you know what? This is going to pass. Okay. I'm willing to see if I can see a little bit different. That's all you need to do. You just need to open yourself just that little bit. When you put those words in your brain to say, I'm willing to do this, it automatically puts your brain in a little bit of a different gear, where the good thoughts can kind of start coming in, right? So using these keywords really helps focus where you're trying to go to, because our brain responds to words, pictures, right? And thoughts and emotions, right? So like pick out good words that would help you to like open yourself up a little bit while still acknowledging your feelings.
Yeah. And the best part of this, Gillian, is that the biggest message I'm getting out of this is that everyone has the power. You are giving
100%.
yourself 100%, 1,000% control in this situation.
That's all we ever have, really. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Wow. I feel really confident I can like dive into the holidays this
you
season.
Can totally.
Yeah, absolutely. Put some feet to this work. I think that was so comprehensive and easy to understand. Just like as Jess said, it was easy to write down. It's going to be a little bit harder to play that out. But now that we know, we have some people in our corner who are probably going to tackle the same thing. That's why this community is so wonderful, and that we're able to kind of discuss and dialogue together the tools that you just gave us. Check in with each other the next couple of weeks or so, and let one another know what are some good characteristics that we are thinking about for our drunkle we're going to have Thanksgiving with, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of important.
So really
don't ask him how much he's drank. That is
off the table.
Sets off everyone. Don't even go there.
Well, we'll not do it.
So Jill, really quick, give us a recap of those 3 things. So first we want to make sure that we're relaxed and not trying to work
a little bit of time to yourself, relax. You're calming your brain outside of the stress situation. Okay. Then you want to identify what your trigger is. So like where, who, what activity it is, when, right? Ask those questions and understand why. What could be your root fear or your root negative belief or disempowering belief that's causing you to feel stressed? Are we talking about, perceptions of failure, about not being good enough, not meeting expectations, being judged for a certain reason? Identify what that is. And then you want to apply spirit lifting mindset tools. So you want to say, okay, if I feel this way, it's one perspective. It's not an ultimate truth. How can I give myself a break on this? And why might this not be true? In terms of rather than it's just one kind of like piece of the pie that is biased based on what, let's say, your particular situation or your like a certain past situation could have been, right? And then if it's difficult people, you want to focus on positive aspects of that person as much as possible. Try to apply compassion as well. What could they be going through to make them act in this way? Okay. and then ask yourself, have I ever been there, something similar? Almost always the answer is yes. And then we can say, well, we know how bad that feels, right? So that helps us to have compassion for someone when we see ourselves a little bit in that person when they're hurting. And then the last thing would be to see if you can lessen that person's triggers. Okay, so look at past conversations, if there's topics between you and that person that has kind of set them off, or certain types of like comments or anything like that. And then you want to try to avoid those topics or comments and try to ask them, if you engage in them, about their interest and their passion, so that they can go to like try to get them into a positive space as well, which will benefit your interaction with each other.
I love it. Gillian, how can people get in touch with you if they need a little deeper work, a little more one-on-one?
Sure. So I'm on Instagram, so at Gillian.Shields_lovelife. I also have a website, www.gillianshields.ca. I have a coaching program for single people. I have a dating and relationship blog where I do a monthly post on there. That's basically. I'm also writing a book. The book's going to be out next year, which is for single people in particular. So yeah, that's what I'm doing.
That's fantastic. So reach out to Gillian, guys. She is a wealth of knowledge. She's compassionate. She knows what's up with you, and she will not steer you wrong. I appreciate your time so much tonight, Gillian, and we look forward to having you back on again for another topic.
Yes,
Great.
This was so fun. Thank you, Gillian, for sharing.
Bye, ladies.
All right. See you out next time on the She Interview.